Now here is a tale of the Glugs of Gosh, and a wonderful tale I ween, of the Glugs of Gosh and the great King Splosh and Tush his virtuous queen. And here is a tale of the crafty Oggs from the neighbouring land of Podge, of their sayings and doings and plottings and brewings, and something about Sir Stodge. Wise to profundity, stout to rotundity, that was the knight Sir Stodge. Oh, the king was rich and the queen was fair, and they made a very respectable pair. And whenever a glug in that peaceful land did anything no one could understand, the knight Sir Stodge he looked in a book and charged that glug with a crime called crook. Then the great Judge Fudge, who wore for a hat the sacred skin of a tortoise-shell cat, he fined that glug for his action rash and frequently asked a deposit in cash. Then every glug went home to his rest, with his head in a bag and his toes to the west. Oh, they knew that was best, their grandpas stepped with their toes to the west. But all the tale that is so far told has nothing whatever to do with the Oggs of Podge, or their crafty dodge, or the trade in pickles and glue. To trade with the Glugs came the Oggs to Gosh, and they said in seductive tones, "We'll give you pianos and pickles and spanners for 17 shiploads of stones. Smooth uns or wobbly uns, firm uns or knobbly uns, all we ask is stones." And the king said, "What?" And the queen said, "Why, that's awfully cheap to the things I buy. For that grocer of ours in a light brown hat asks 2 and 11 for pickles like that." But a glug stood up with a wart on his nose, and he said, "Your Majesty's Oggs is foes." But the Glugs cried, "Peace, we hold your jaw. How did our grandpas fashion the law?" So the knight Sir Stodge he looked in his book, and he read, "When the goods was cheap, then the goods they took." So they fined the glug with the wart on his nose for wearing a wart with his everyday clothes. And the goods were bought through a glug named Gones, and the Oggs went home with their loads of stones, which they landed with glee in the land of Podge. Do you notice the dodge? No, nor yet did the Glugs, nor the knight Sir Stodge. The following summer the Oggs came back with a cargo of 8-day clocks, and hand-painted screens and sewing machines, and mangles and scissors and socks. And they said, "For these excellent things we bring, we are ready to take more stones, and in bricks or road metal, for goods you will settle indented by your Mr. Gones." Said the Glugs praisingly, "Why, how amazingly smart of industrious Gones." And the king said, "Oh," and the queen said, "Ooh, that curtain, what a beautiful blue." But a glug stood up with some very large ears, and he said, "There is more to this thing than appears, and we ought to be taxing these goods of the Oggs, or our industries soon will be gone to the dogs." But the king said, "Bosh, you're ungluggish and rude." And the queen said, "What an absurd attitude." And the Glugs cried, "Down with political quacks, how did our grandpas look at a tax?" So the knight Sir Stodge he looked in his book. "No tax," he said, "wherever I look." So they fined the glug with the prominent ears for being old-fashioned by several years. And the Oggs went home with the stones full steam. Do you notice the scheme? No, nor yet did the Glugs in their dreamiest dream. Then every month to the land of Gosh the Oggs they continued to come, with buttons and hooks and medical books and rotary engines and rum, large cases with labels, occasional tables, hair tonic and fiddles and phones, and the Glugs, while concealing their joy in the dealing, paid promptly in nothing but stones. Why, it was screamingly laughable, seemingly, asking for nothing but stones. And the king said, "Ah," and the queen said, "Oh, our drawing-room now is a heavenly show of large overmantels and whatnots and chairs, and a statue of Splosh at the head of the stairs." But a glug stood up with a cast in his eye, and he said, "Far too many such baubles we buy, with all the Gosh factories closing their doors and importers' warehouses lining our shores." But the Glugs cried, "Down with such meddlesome fools. What did our grandpas lay down in the rules?" So the night Sir Stodgy looked in his book. "To cheapness," he said, "was the road they took." Then every glug who was not too fat turned 17 handsprings and jumped on his hat. And they fined the glug with the cast in his eye for looking both ways, which he did not deny, and for having no visible precedent, which is a crime in the poor and a fault in the rich. So the glugs continued with greed and glee to buy cheap clothing and pills and tea, till every glug in the land of Gosh owned 3 clean shirts and a 4th in the wash. But they all grew idle, fond of ease, easy to swindle, hard to please. And the voice of Joy was a lonely voice as he railed at Gosh for its foolish choice. But the great king grinned and the good queen gushed as the goods of the Ogs were madly rushed. And the knight Sir Stodge, with a wave of his hand, declared it a happy and a prosperous land.